Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics, brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is a comics writer, editor, letterer, and more. And one of the people behind the now being Kickstarted comic, The Deadliest Bouquet, is Erica Schultz. Thanks for coming on, Erica.
Thank you for having me.
So we're going to talk about Deadliest Bouquet here in a bit, but I want to start with your career path because you have had a shockingly multifaceted one, even for the world of comics. I mean, I currently work in an advertising agency. That is my day job. I work in online and social media. You started at an ad agency, actually a much more common comics beginning than people might realize. I'm curious, like, what did you originally have designs on being? Like, did you have a specific career in mind before you turned to comics, or did you always have comics in mind?
For me, I started in college as a sports medicine major, and the school that I had gone to didn't have, they weren't accredited for physical therapy and sports medicine, and I didn't know that when I first started. So for me, I pivoted and I was like, well, this kind of sucks, because I knew what I knew was going to happen was the second I graduated, I had to immediately go to grad school in order to get a job. And I didn't want to have to do that. So I thought, all right, I'll switch my major. So I switched my major to English and education, and I enjoyed that. And then end of my junior year, I had wanted to go into the service after high school. My mom said, no, you have to go to college first. So the end of my junior year, I went to recruiters, and I had a contract with the Navy that after I graduated, I was gonna go into the Navy, and all my friends are getting jobs and lining up grad school and internships and things like that, for senior year. And I'm like, I'm fine. I'm going to the service. I'm not going to have to worry about that. And then, the sort of the idea was that if I were to go to grad school, then I would use my GI Bill for that.
Right.
Well, that didn't exactly work out because I blew my knee out. And, so they kind of said, yeah, sorry, we're not going to take you because your knee's all garbage and basic training is just going to make it worse. So thank you very much. Cut me loose. And then I was, sort of floating without any job prospects, because if I wanted to go into education, I would then again have to go to grad school.
Right.
So I had been working at the newspaper at school. And I'd been a copywriter, I'd been a layout editor, and I'd done managing editing and stuff. And I really enjoyed a lot of the local companies, like restaurants and stuff would just say, okay, here's the coupon, you design the ad. And I ended up doing a lot of that. And I liked it. I thought it was fun. I mean, it was, completely, hey, design an ad for a bunch of drunk college students for a pizza place. It's not rocket science, but I thought it was interesting. So I thought, why not try my hand at advertising? So I started interviewing at a bunch of ad agencies. And when I graduated, I ended up being very lucky. I got a job at an ad agency called Gray in New York City. Probably, I think it was like August. I graduated in May. So I was pretty lucky to get a job there. And I was there for about 8 years. Unfortunately, 2007, 2008 is when everybody got laid off.
Right.
And I was part of that. So I had worked with several outside vendors for storyboards and stuff. And one of them happened to be a studio in New York called Continuity Studios. So when I had been laid off, I was sort of, reaching out to different contacts, being like, hey, I'm looking for work. And Continuity had just gotten the job to do the Astonishing X-Men motion comics. And they were looking for, Photoshop artists and, graphic design and all kinds of things, and the things that I had the skills to do. So I started working there, and I ended up learning animation from a couple of the creators there. And I don't know why, but for whatever reason, and I gravitated toward doing lip sync animation. So I ended up being the lip sync animator for the entire 6 issues for the Astonishing X-Men motion comic Gifted, that first story arc. So I did that. And then the next project that came into the studio is we would work on commercial work. Obviously, it was interesting because I was on the other side of the advertising thing. Usually I was the one calling, a studio for storyboards, and now I'm the one helping create the storyboards. So the next project I think we got was another book from, it was either a Marvel or DC book, I can't remember which. And so then I was working on more traditional comics, and that really taught me the process of traditional print comics. And I tend to, if I'm even slightly interested in something, I do a deep dive. So I really sort of absorbed a lot, and I learned a lot. And then around 2009, 2010, I started writing my own comics, which was M3. And Vicente Alcazar, who was a Spanish artist, was one of the artists at the studio at the time that I spoke to about maybe doing M3. And, he gravitated toward it. And then we just sort of went from there.
Yeah. I mean, maybe some people from the outside might listen to, you starting an ad agency and find that to be like an odd beginning. Like maybe they're envisioning Mad Men and you just drinking all the time, because I think that's kind of what people envision when it comes to ad agencies. But I think it is really interesting because, like, I think part of the reason why there's several people from comics that I know that came from the ad world is that there is like a certain overlap in the skill set, not just in the art stuff, but in just like the project management and in like, especially for creator owned stuff. I imagine coming from Deadliest Bouquet or going to Deadliest Bouquet, there's like a certain part of your brain that was trained well for that whole project. The Kickstarter aspect, the project management of it from the agency world, because what is agency life except for project management with a core team in which you're trying to accomplish a singular goal, whether it's a comic or it's an ad campaign, it just depends.
Yeah, and that's very, very true. I I did, when you're at an agency, basically it's a collaboration. It's not, it's, I was a copywriter, and then I laterally moved to be an art director. So you're an art director, then you have a copywriter, then you have a producer, then you have a director if you're doing television or online stuff, or you have a photographer that you're working with, or whatever. I mean, you're coordinating many people, and it is really a collaborative process in advertising. So being able to sort of do the project management, to sort of spin all these plates simultaneously, really, it did help a great deal, especially even with M3, because I taught myself lettering for
Right.
M3. I did the layout of the book. I put the book together. I wanted Vicente really. I mean, because Vicente was penciling, inking, and coloring, I wanted him to be able to just focus on that, and then I would sort of handle the rest. And that's basically what it was. And really, I mean, advertising really has. It's really very much like that in comics, in the sense that you have tight deadlines. You have on-air dates that you have to get. Same thing with comics. You've got dates that you've got to get the books to the printer. So, I mean, there's really very similar back and forth. The one thing that I find funny, though, is because I have that sort of corporate background, I tend to be a little more type A than some other people who may have just gotten into comics to get into comics. So I tend to be a little more type A than them, and especially like if they want to do something, especially if they really don't have that sort of like corporate background. I sort of sometimes come off as a little, I don't know, pushy or whatever, because I'm like, we got deadlines, we gotta get this stuff out.
I know that. I know that experience. But I don't want to get into continuity studios, really, but I do think it's interesting. So you went there, you did art and design work, you did the animating of the Astonishing X-Men motion comic, you did all of that. But I am interested, you jumped into M3, you worked with Vicente. I am interested in, at what point in the process of working at continuity did you realize that you wanted to go from kind of manifesting these other ideas for other people to making your own stories?
Well, I mean, I had always created stuff on my own. I had always written and done a whole bunch of stuff that I kind of decided, I I have notebooks full of stories that I'm never going to do anything with. Maybe making a comic out of them would be a good way to get them out. And I sort of approached it that way. And M3 was the first story that I tried that with. And it tend to work because, I think what happens sometimes is comics, I don't think, are the medium for everything. I know everybody thinks that it is, especially because a lot of things are becoming, a lot of television or streaming stuff is coming out of comics. So people are like, oh, use comics as a proof of concept. I don't think of it that way. And for the people that do, that's on you. That's fine. I'm not gonna, negate that opinion. But for me, it's make the best thing in the medium that you're working in. So for me, I'll see people be like, take a writing course with me and they'll say, oh, I want to make this into a TV show, so I want to make it into a comic first. No, make a good comic first.
Right.
Like, do that. Make a good comic and focus on making it a good comic. And then if you want to reach out to an agent or something like that, fine, but focus on making it a good comic. Because if you're focusing on making a good TV show, then why don't you just write a TV show?
Right.
I looked at comics not only as a medium, just that I enjoyed, as a fan, but also as a way to say, oh, well, maybe this is, I've tried short stories and nothing came out of it. Why don't I look to comics as a medium to tell these stories? And they ended up working there because I tend to have stories that are more visual in general, but not everything needs to be a TV show. Not everything needs to be a movie,
Right. I do think it's interesting, the idea that of people wanting to, take this TV show concept and make it a comic first, but they also wanted to make it, like a TV show or something like that. But the thing is, for me, for those types of projects, it's, if you can't make a good comic first with the story, it's hard to use that as proof of concept. It's like it's failing at its core identity. Why would people be interested in it as a TV show? I've always found that mix to be very odd.
Well, because I think when they're creating the book, they're not thinking of it as a comic. They're thinking of it as a TV show.
Right. Storyboards, basically.
Yeah. And comics aren't storyboards. And I think a lot of people really don't understand that. And look, this is not a medium for everybody.
Right.
And one of the things that I always say in the classes that I teach is, look, if you want to write comics, write comics. Nobody's stopping you. If you want to write comics as a career, then it is very, very different.
Mm-hmm.
And that is you have to wrap your head around a whole different paradigm. And I don't think everybody really wants to hear that. I think that the vast majority of people, and this is and I know this comes off sounding as like holier than thou, and by no means do I intend for it to. I sound bitchy because, well, probably I am. But like, I think what happens is, I think everybody, not everybody, but I think a good majority of people don't understand the process of comics. They don't understand the coordination that goes into it. Because there are so many moving parts, it's really easy for one thing to break down and for the whole project to fall apart. Like, that's very, very easy to happen. And I think people just sort of go into a store and see a comic on a shelf and think, oh, wow, it just magically appeared, without really understanding what it took to get it there.
Right. No, I mean, I think you're totally right. And also, I do want to emphasize, I don't think you're being bitchy. I think it seems like just realism, because, and it's not just comics too. It's when you look at ways you can make comics, let's say you want to own your own comic. You ask Eric Stevenson at Image, is everyone perfectly adept at making a comic image? And he'll say no. It's not for everyone, because that right there, that's even more like an ad agency, because that's like creator owned in the purest sense, in which you control every aspect of it. Or like Kickstarter. Can you imagine somebody who had no experience with Kickstarter, didn't talk to anybody about it ahead of time, and went in there trying to think that they're going to make $100,000 or something? It would.
Do you know how many people do that though?
A lot, and they are very sad afterwards. It doesn't work, and it is really fascinating. But I do want to ask about. So you went into M3, and you went into M3 with Vicente, and it was a story, from what I understand, that you had with you for a bit. But I am interested in, most people, when they do their first comic, they learn a lot from it. It is like a crash course right there.
Yes.
But you had, with the agency experience, with working with continuity, it seems to me that you had maybe a leg up that others didn't. Did you feel like you had pretty solid footing coming in from continuity and from your background, or was it still a crash course?
I mean, there's a part of me that felt, I had maybe the slightest, idea of what I was getting myself into versus, Joe Blow off the street. But I mean, it was still,
A lot.
I mean, yeah, and I really and there were a lot of, the indie comics scene, there were a lot of creators that, that would answer questions and stuff. But I had the ability to say, okay, I had people that were around me and that I was exposed to because of my position of continuity that were able to sort of answer quick questions. I have this thing where I don't like people thinking I'm dumb, even though like I by no means am the brightest person on the planet. But I would always sort of fear of asking questions. So what I would do is I would, Forrest Gump my way through it. And if it worked, great, nobody will know. And if I crashed and burned, then it was like, okay, well, you kind of have to ask somebody now.
Yeah.
So there were some things that I just sort of fake it till I made it kind of thing, and others where I reached out to other indie comic creators and was just like, okay, hey, I don't understand how to do this or whatever. I also, I mean, if there was a technical thing, I've also had a lot of friends that, were still graphic designers, that were still artists, from college and stuff that I could always reach out to. And, one of my very close friends, Kevin Maher, who was actually the designer of the logo for Deadliest Bouquet and several of the other logos that, for my creator-owned work, Forgotten Home, 12 Devils Dancing. And, Kevin is like a guru at InDesign and Illustrator and Photoshop and everything. So if I hit a wall in the sense that like I didn't know, I had trouble with something technical, I would just reach out to him and be like, look, hey, this is what I'm trying to do, and maybe my file is corrupt or whatever, but like, he would be able to be like, okay, cool, just try this, try that. Or I'd go online and I'd like look at lynda.com or, any other sort of online tutorials to really try and make sure that I didn't have to ask for help from a whole lot of people. But that's like my own hang up. Like I know that's like a hang up that I personally have that, I'm sure a therapist would want to talk to me about it.
Yo, everybody. I want to take a quick second to give a shout out to Macroverse. Macroverse is an exciting digital comics platform that makes next-gen comics custom crafted for your phone. Macroverse's comics utilize its unique tap story format, which ensures this isn't a PDF on an iPad or an endless scroll, but a designed for mobile experience where every episode is crafted to take advantage of this one-of-a-kind style. Macroverse is curated for quality, with every series they publish being something they believe deserves to be read by a massive audience. Think of it like HBO for comics, with over 35 titles and 400 episodes from names like Brian Stelfreeze, Juan Doe, Paul Scheer, and more. Check out Macroverse today by downloading the app on iOS or Google Play and get started with a rotating collection of free episodes or unlock the entire universe for just $4.99 a month, with half of all profits going to the creators themselves. And now, back to the show. Well, I mean, honestly, I think one of the most frequently stated ideas on this podcast from many, many creators is the only way to learn how to make comics is to make comics. And like, there's a lot of stuff that you could be told, but you wouldn't learn in the same way you would by just doing it. And I want to jump into like your writing bibliography is kind of dizzying in its eclectic nature. And I want to run down some of those projects. So here comes a big spiel. Okay, so you co-wrote a revenge graphic novel based off the ABC series with Ted Sullivan, who was a writer for the show. You launched a Charm series at Dynamite, and you wrote a Xena Warrior Princess series. This isn't everything. You've written stories in anthologies like Where We Live and the SFX Vertigo Quarterly. You were one of the people who built up Swords of Sorrow with Gail Simone. You even lettered the whole thing. Wrote a Daredevil annual in 2018, wrote a story for 2080's Prague 2145 with art from the always amazing Liana Kangas, and launched the fantasy story Forgotten Home at Comixology Originals. That's a bit, but it's still a lot. And it all, like, the thing that really interests me about it isn't the volume, it's that it all kind of delves into different types of stories and genres. So I'm going to ask you a terrible question. I apologize in advance. With all that in mind, what do you think are the hallmarks of the type of story you like to tell? Is it more than like what a single genre could hold?
Well, okay, so let's unpack some of this.
Okay, there's a lot.
All right. So M3 is a crime story, and it takes place in the real world. There's no magic. There's no other kind of stuff in it, and it's it was something that I was comfortable writing because I had read Tom Clancy books and things like that, and that sort of like espionage intrigue kind of thing was always interesting to me. So that seeing that I had worked in that genre was what really sort of got me that revenge job, because they said, all right, well, we need somebody who's written a kick-ass woman and doing crazy James Bondy kind of things.
Right.
I didn't want to get typecast.
Right.
And people don't think that can happen, but it can happen to writers. You can get typecast, because then it turned into, all right, we're not going to hire you unless we have some type of crime fiction that we want to write. And it was actually said to me a few times by a few different people, you're the poor man's Ed Brubaker, which I actually took as a compliment.
Yeah, that's still really good.
I took that as a great compliment. I was like, I will happily be the poor man's Ed Brubaker. So I wanted to do different things, because I wanted to not only prove to other people that I could do different things, but also prove to myself that I could. So Revenge did two things. One, it showed that I could work with, I could play nice with a production company, but it also showed that, I could sort of live within the confines and continuity of something specific that had already been established. The Swords of Sorrow, I mean, it was dumb luck to get that. Gail was really looking for a lot of new and upcoming people. I mean, some people had already worked on a ton of stuff, but, Gail really was looking out for a lot of people. And I owe Gail a huge debt of thanks. And every time I see her, I tell her so. And that allowed me to sort of play a little bit more in sort of the mystical realm, with the swords and the teleporting and things like that. And it also introduced me to Dynamite, which is where Charmed and Xena, I got the work with Charmed and Xena. But what I was doing on the side was, there's a fantastic creator named Claire Connolly. And Claire and I would joke around about like weird, like really weird things, like weird stories. And we had had a joke back and forth about, when I was working at this one place, the artist was asking me to find reference and said, find reference of find me a photograph of a dinosaur. And I was like, oh, so like, dinosaur bones or an artist rendering? No, photograph of a dinosaur. I was like, there are no photographs of dinosaurs. like they don't exist. and the artist was getting very frustrated, and then it just was this blurting out like Jurassic Park. I was like, so you want a screenshot of a dinosaur that was either animatronic or CGI? Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah.
But I can't get you a photograph of a dinosaur. So I was lamenting to Claire and her sister Paige, who's also an illustrator, about this. And Claire, I said, the next thing I'm going to be asked for is a photograph of Winston Churchill riding a dinosaur through 18th century Parliament. And she's like, I'll draw that. And she did.
Yeah.
And so I had this commission of Winston Churchill riding a dinosaur through 18th century Parliament. And it's this bizarre thing. And you're like, where the hell did this come from? And Paige said, you need to turn this into a story.
Yeah.
So I think we were at Free Comic Book Day, and we were at this great shop called the Comic Book Shop in Delaware. And I just started writing. And a couple hours later, I had a script for a story called The Unauthorized Biography of Winston Churchill, a documentary. So Winston Churchill finds a time machine, goes back to recruit dinosaurs for the war effort. Things don't turn out the way he thinks. And Claire and I put that out. And it is a bizarre story. It really is. But it just showed that I could do comedy, that I could do something totally different. And then we did another story together called Cheese the Love Story, which was about a cow and a goat from rival dairy farms that fall in love. And they always have these like weird, like bizarre, like Twilight Zone, 60s, 70s Twilight Zone twists at the end. And we did that, and everybody loved it. And they thought it was like bonkers. But, hey, why not? And then we did and through all this, I'm doing other stories. Like I'm, doing Daredevil for Marvel while I'm writing a story about, lobsters in space with Claire. So I want to keep myself open to be able to do other things. I know that, the licensed jobs, the jobs that I'm actually getting paid for, are probably the ones that are usually going to be in more superhero crime fiction, maybe some magical stuff now that I've done Forgotten Home and Charmed. Um, but as a writer and as a creator, I don't want to limit myself in general. So, Claire and I have a whole list of crazy stuff that, we're thinking about doing, like, a play on the X-Men, but with octopi and, all kinds of stuff.
I just want to say, poor man's Ed Brubaker would never have done an unauthorized biography of Winston Churchill. So you're clearly several levels above that. But I've talked about this on the podcast with a lot of creators, and like the idea of like where ideas come from is such a fascinating one, because
I have no idea where they come from.
Well, no one does. No one does. I mean, that's the thing is like, you could not have recreated the exact scenario you needed to come up with that Winston Churchill story if you had like a million more opportunities. It required this outlandish question about having a photograph of a dinosaur and then you recounting that story and all these different things. I mean, I think that's one of the fascinating things about like creation, is just like, it could be one day when you're mowing the lawn or taking a shower, and next thing you know, something pops in your head and all of a sudden you have your next book, and that's just how it works, and you can't control it. It just is.
Yeah, and whenever anybody asks me, where do your ideas come from, I'm like, the voices in my head. I really don't even know how to answer that. And I sort of harken back to that scene in Empire Records where Lucas is sitting on the couch and he goes, "Who knows where ideas come from? They just appear."
Yeah.
And they do, because ideas can come from physical and emotional exhaustion. You can come up with an idea. Like there are days, especially during the pandemic, where I've been like, there is nothing in the tank. Like I'm not even on empty. I'm like below empty. We're rusting. And then, I'll just take a deep breath and be like exasperated. And then all of a sudden another idea will come to me and it's like, okay, I got to write this one down now. So it's like, I genuinely don't know where ideas come from. I was talking to my husband the other day and I was saying, when we were kids and we saw like Indiana Jones or Star Wars or, Close Encounters or something like that, like we had this idea of like, oh my God, how do these people come up with this stuff? And now, and obviously I'm propelling myself egotistically into the realm of George Lucas and, Steven Spielberg for this, anecdote. But it's the idea of like, well, now I'm one of those people and people are wondering where my ideas come from.
Right.
It's probably, it probably came the same way for them. They don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I will say, like, one thing that I really love about your story about how you tackled all those books is one thing that people don't really realize about a lot of comic careers is some of it's just like fateful sequencing. Like, you do M3 and that proves that you can do crime, and then you take that on, and then you do Swords of Sorrow, and it, connects you with Dynamite, and that leads to these. I will say that like comics, having a successful comics career is one part talent, one part, I don't know, fate, and then also the other one, which I will say you're extremely good at, is hustle. Like hustle is an extremely important part of like of a comic career, especially given the fact that based off my math, I am the 7,000th podcast you're doing this week. So I mean, but that's one of the most underrated aspects of the comic creator workload, making contacts, promoting books, connecting with publishers. Like those are the things that can turn a good writer who has ideas but never makes it into the writer that does make it.
Well, that's why I was going to say that's why to do this as a career, you have to want it more than air.
Yeah.
Writing for me, creating comics for me is a compulsion. All right. I have to do this. I have to write. I have to create. It is literally a compulsion. If I go more than 2 days without writing something, even if it's just like a quick idea, I feel like there's, it's like, what happened to me? Oh my God, did I fail? And that's just me. Like, I know it's a crazy idea. Like, I get it. but for some people, they see comics and they think it's, first of all, people see it and think it's fast money. There are way easier ways to make a living than being in comics. Believe me, all the conversations I've had with my mom, with if I'm having a bad day or I get a rejection letter from a publisher or something, the first thing my mom always says is like, I wish something that you loved more than this.
Yeah.
It would make your life so much easier. And that's the honest to God truth. Freelance life is not for everybody. Comics is certainly not for everybody. It is difficult, and the hustle is tough. And unless you have an agent or a business manager or somebody like that who is going to help with that, it's a rough go. And one of the things that I say on a lot of panels, when people want to, break into comics and stuff, is you have to surround yourself with people that not necessarily are in the industry, but people that understand you, respect your love of this, and support you. My best friend has never read, the only comics my best friend has ever read are the ones that I hand her.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. And if it doesn't have my name on it, she's less likely to read it. But even with her, sometimes she'll say, like, I don't understand why you keep doing the thing that makes you frustrated. Like, why do you keep working at this if you're frustrated with the industry? Well, because it's the only thing that I feel like I can do.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to have that, or you have to have something like that to stay in this industry and to continue in this industry. Otherwise, I mean, Kirby said it, comics are going to break your heart, and they will.
Mm-hmm.
They will absolutely break your heart. But I said on one podcast, and I felt kind of bad, but it is kind of true. As a comics creator, when, even, I would say I'm like C+ level, like I'm obviously not top tier A comics. Like I'm like more like, C+, B-. It's still, it's a hustle consistently. It is, you get lots of rejections. I mean, if you even get a response from a pitch, a lot of times you'll pitch stuff and you won't even hear anything.
Yeah.
And especially being a comics writer, it's difficult because you have to create a book. As a comics artist, you can download a script online. You can, do some sequential pages and hand them in as a submission to get work. As a writer, nobody's going to read your script. I learned this the hard way. My first San Diego Comic-Con was in 2012. And I had written a Batman script, I had written a Captain America script, and I'd written a Transformers, all spec scripts that I wanted to get in front of Marvel, DC, IDW. And the first panel that I saw was Breaking into Comics the Marvel Way. It was led by C.B. Cebulski. Axel Alonso was on the panel when he was still at Marvel. Sam Humphries was on the panel, and Mark Brooks was on the panel. And when Axel said, no one is going to read your script, you have to have a finished book.
Right.
I was lucky because I had the finished trade, the first trade for M3 on me as well. And at the end, I went and I handed it to them. But you have to put, and Sam Humphries, I will never forget this. Sam Humphries said, put your money where your mouth is and make a book. And it is tougher as a writer. It absolutely is. And I think because everyone thinks that they can write. They think that writing is communication. That is, yes, that is fundamentally true. Writing a story is very different. There are good ideas and terrible executions. And I think that, as creators, and I see this all the time because I teach writing at the Kubert School, as creators, we tend to get in our own heads. We fall in love with our own ideas. And then when anybody comes in and says that doesn't make any sense, you get very defensive. And believe me, I've been that defensive person. I've also been the editor trying to help that defensive person. So I think everybody thinks I've got this $1 million idea. It's, well, great, but it doesn't mean that it's going to, don't expect it to do $1 million in comics.
Mm-hmm.
Don't expect it to be, the next Netflix. Maybe it will. But if you go into it thinking as that is your end goal, as opposed to go into it thinking, I want to create a really good comic, then you're already setting yourself up to fail.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's, you brought up Sam. Sam is a perfect example of everything you're talking about, because he didn't just say that advice casually. That was his life. I'm pretty sure he self-funded Our Love Is Real. And like, that was kind of one of the ways that he got himself on the, in front of people and everything. And it's just, it's a lot to ask out of people, but at the same time, it's kind of like, I mean, like I said earlier, like the only way to make comics is to make comics, or learn how to make comics is to make comics. And you can't do that without, as a writer, you can't do that without art. And a lot of times that requires personal investment, that requires all kinds of things. But I do, I brought up your eclectic nature to your career earlier, and you mentioned, you're a writing storyteller teacher at the Kubert School. You have been a lettering instructor at Comics Experience. You are an editor at Mad Cave. You have lettered many comics. That's a lot. Is that tied to your, you called it your compulsion to make comics? Like, is it just like your passion just spilling out of you, or like, where does that come from?
It's my passion spilling out of me. It is also, I mean, it's a purely financial decision too sometimes.
Yeah.
I have a lot of friends that make good comics, or they've made comics with publishers, and then they want to make their own comic, and they don't realize how much a publisher brings to it. And because I've done it all on my own, I offer to help. And I'm like, okay, so you need me to help with lettering. Okay, I can help with lettering. Or you need me to help with editing. I can help with editing. I think that editing a comic is a different skill set than editing a novel. I think that you have to understand the process of a comic to be able to edit for one. I tell that, I have sort of my opening lecture every year is I talk about the cosmic comic wheel. So, in the center of the wheel is the story, and there's all these different spokes, the penciler, the inker, the writer, the editor, the letterer, production, but whatever. And if you have done more of those spokes, then it's going to make you better at whatever it is you want to focus on.
Right.
So I'm primarily a writer, but I'm also an editor and a letterer. So my major is writing, my two minors are editing and lettering.
Yeah.
But I can do pretty much everything. Like when I was at Continuity Studios, I was inking, I was coloring, I was doing background art, I was doing all this other stuff. I don't feel comfortable in my own artistic ability to draw my own comics. And I have enough contacts to be able to reach out to people who are good enough to draw comics. I'm very lucky that way. But even if you're just starting out, talk to people on social media, look at people's work. The one thing that I will say, though, is that seeing someone's pinups or, splash pages or whatever is one thing. If you find an artist that you really like their work, ask for sequential work.
Right.
Because that is super, super, super important. That, and if they say they don't have any sequential work, then that's not somebody that you need to work with. And you can say that, and you can say, thank you so much, but I'm looking for an artist with sequential experience already.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've seen a lot of good stories with terrible art, or a lot of great art with terrible lettering. There are a lot of letterers out there that will letter things for pretty inexpensive, or there's a lot of editors that will look at your script and help you develop your story better. I think some people that have done, writing for screen or television will think that writing comics is going to be easy. There is a physical real estate in writing a comic, where the balloons are going to go, etc. There's real estate there. When you're doing a television show or a film, if you have a lot of dialogue, you can just ask the actor to say it faster.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do that in comics. You know what you do? You squish your kerning, and you squish the percentage, and this is what you get. And as a letterer, the job of the letterer is to not cover up the art. So if you're writing a script that has 6 balloons in one panel, then your artist is going to draw a small character and all this other crazy stuff, all this room. Or if the artist doesn't do that, then what's your letterer going to do? So, I mean, one of the reasons why I like lettering my own stuff is because I self-edit. You can look at what the artist did and maybe what the artist drew, the expression on the face of the character, the acting coming through from the character already explains and communicates a dialogue line. Psh, take that balloon out. But again, like I said before, sometimes, as creators, we get married to our own ideas and we don't want to be edited and anything like that. And I completely understand that. But it's like everybody needs an editor. Like Stephen King's got an editor. If Stephen King has an editor, everybody needs an editor. Like that man's written like a bajillion books.
I'm sure that he would be the first to admit that he needs an editor as well. But I do want to point out, though, I mean, so let's get into The Deadliest Bouquet. It's a great example of the value of having a good editor because you're working with James B. Emmett. And from what I understand, you originally envisioned it as a 3-arc series. But then when you talked to James, James helped you streamline it down to a 5-issue miniseries. And it all came together then. That's one of those interesting things where it's like, I've talked to people who, I talked to this one creator who they went and talked to an artist, an established artist, and they were like, yeah, I have my magnum opus all planned. It's like a 50-issue series and blah, blah, blah. And the artist was just like this was their first comic and they had this plan for a 50-issue series.
Nope.
And the artist just told them, they're like, start with one comic and go from there. Like, you can't start with the big thing. And like, I don't know, I'm interested in how, working with James fundamentally changed The Deadliest Bouquet, because it seems like streamlining the story maybe kept it more all killer, no filler. Was that kind of what it was?
It was, well, I mean, I had this idea for several years and I had started and stopped it multiple times and I had attacked the story from different angles. And what was happening is, because I tend to put a lot of history behind my characters. I do a timeline for everything, what happened in the world before the story starts, during the story, after, what's the aftermath. And so I had anchored this story into World War II. And there was a whole bunch of stuff there. And I kept thinking like, well, do I start in World War II? And then I go, do I start in the 40s? And then my next arc is 50s, 60s. And then my next arc is, 70s, 80s, 90s. And you see the 3 generations of family and you sort of see generational trauma and all this other stuff. And I started doing that, and I would just get too far into the weeds and go down the rabbit hole in one of these directions, and then it would sort of derail everything. So what I did was, James is also an artist himself, and he's a creator, and so he gets it from an aesthetic point of view, and also from sort of a critical eye as an editor. And James is really good at finding the through line. So I was like, look, I have half-written scripts, here, there, and everywhere. I know there's some good stuff in here. I just can't tell the good from the bad right now, and it's all too jumbled. It's a bit overwhelming. And, God bless him, because he took everything in and he read everything over and he said, okay, this bit you keep, this bit you keep, this bit you do as a flashback, no more than like 2 panels.
Right.
And it'll touch on it and it'll give the information, but you're not going to, go down the rabbit hole. And then this, and he really sort of came together and said, look, the core of this story is these 3 sisters. Yes, you have these 3 generations, but the core story is these 3 sisters, their relationship to each other, their relationship to their mom, their resentment of their childhood, their resentment towards each other. And, when someone dies in a family, it's a comedy of errors sometimes, but other times shit gets real.
Right.
And that's really what we're dealing with here. Yes, we have these badass women, but, and there's going to be cool fight scenes and, things like that. But the core story is a family drama. And one of the reasons why I write about family a lot, whether it's biological or found family, is because there's something that everyone can relate to. You want your audience to relate to your characters. You want your audience to be able to find some semblance of linkage with them. And it's like, why do people find a connection with Superman? A super buff dude from another planet. He's an alien. There's something about the way his story is told that allows you to have an emotional connection with him. So I think that whether you are one of three children and part of that sort of round robin of alliances, am I going to be on the side of the older sister, the younger sister, the middle sister, whatever, whether you're part of that or you've suffered a loss in your family, or you have any type of sibling that you have a resentment, a love-hate relationship with, I think you'll find something in this story. Because, mind you, it's a story about the relationship of these women, but it's also then set behind in the backdrop of sort of this Agatha Christie murder mystery,
right?
Of who killed Jasmine. So you've got these sisters trying to figure out who killed their mom, and her, their mother Jasmine had her own sordid life. But then it's this idea of like, who killed mom? Well, we'll figure that out, but you stole my prom date and I'm still pissed about it, kind of thing. It's they get distracted by their own sort of resentment and anger toward each other.
Yeah. I think, okay, so for listeners that don't know, The Deadliest Bouquet is Erica's currently being kickstarted, because this is going up the day it launches. Currently being kickstarted miniseries with Carola Borelli as the artist, Gab Contreras as the colorist, and James B. Emmett as the editor, also you as the letterer. And it's about, in 1998, three estranged sisters, Rose, Poppy, and Violet, trained by their Nazi hunting mother, come together to solve their mother's murder. To me, the thing that really pops about the first issue is that relationship, because like you're talking about, like, one of the things I really love about the sisters is they're all like so fiercely independent and unique from one another, but they also have those natural 2-on-1 moments that form whenever you're like a 3-pack of siblings. That's just kind of a thing that happens. I think I also like the fact that, as a quick shorthand for readers, you have like Responsible Rose, Princess Poppy. I think it was Violet that said that. Violent Violet was the one that used those terms. And while those quick nicknames do not define these characters in their totality, it is nice shorthand for us kind of understanding their archetypes and where they come from. I'm curious if it sounds like, originally this was this multi-generational story. Why did it make sense to build this whole story around those three characters in particular as a gateway into those other stories you want to tell even?
Two reasons. There was a practical reason because I had fleshed them out more. So I had more of their sort of history and background already written out, but also because I think it's easier to relate to something a little more modern. I love the 90s. I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and I love the 90s. And I was in college in 1998, which was when the story is set. And I wanted to make sure that the story wasn't so dated that people couldn't relate to it.
Right.
But also, I think sometimes cell phones really screw up a crime story.
Yep.
You literally have a computer in your pocket, and we've seen the sort of elaboration of that, like taking a photograph with your phone and then all of a sudden matching a fingerprint, kind of thing. So I wanted there to be a limitation. I wanted to be able to draw out the investigation, to draw out the drama of the story. And the story itself starts on a Sunday morning and it ends by Friday. So it all takes place over, 6-7 days. And, we have flashbacks obviously throughout, but that's where the core story takes place. And setting it with these sisters that have sort of a very rich relationship to each other. Because even though Jasmine is a fantastic character and Jasmine's parents, Dahlia and Leif, and the whole French Resistance, World War II thing is a great backdrop, the interplay between these three sisters is what's more interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like you said, I'm one of three, so there is literally this round robin of alliances. This I love you, I hate you, I love you again. Off the top of your hat, and there is a back and forth between the sisters. And I worked on this a little bit when I was doing Charmed for Dynamite, because those are the three sisters in that story as well. But of course, you have these fantastical elements of magic and, demons and all this other stuff. That, sometimes because that story needs to be centered in the magic and the demons and stuff, you sort of pull that away from the sister dynamic so much. Whereas in this, there is that isn't the distraction. The distraction, if you want to call it, is for Violet, the distraction is who the hell killed my mom. For Rose, the distraction is I've been living with mom, doing my own thing, and now my two sisters are here to kind of, blow up my spot.
Right.
And Poppy, I was off as a mom doing my own thing, and now I'm getting sucked back into the dysfunction of our family that I worked so hard to get away from.
Right.
And the cops are like, look, we're just trying to do our jobs here, and we've got to deal with these three bickering bitches. So yeah, I mean, there's no Keystone Cop. The cops are definitely competent. Like, I'm not going to do like a Keystone Cop kind of thing, but there is definitely this sort of idea of, we want to find out who killed mom, but while we're at it and while you're right in front of me, when am I going to get another opportunity to give you a piece of my mind?
Yo, everybody, I want to take a quick second to talk about the crew over at Bad Idea. Do you like bone-shredding destruction, wanton corporate malfeasance, and reckless use of industrial machinery? Then buckle up, because Bad Idea, the unruly and experimental new comic book publisher, is back with Tankers. On sale in select comic shops now from New York Times best-selling writer Robert Venditti and blockbuster artist Juan Jose Rip. A global energy conglomerate has just solved our impending oil shortage, and their plan is pretty simple. Send a team of contractors armed to the teeth in mech suits back to the Cretaceous period, tweak the trajectory of the meteor that killed the dinosaurs, and give mankind another 500 millennia worth of oil reserves. What could go wrong? Only all of human history, of course. Tankers from Bad Idea, on sale in select comic shops now. And now, back to the show. Looking back on what you were saying about how James helped you kind of figure out the story, I really like the solutions you came up with, because if it was a 3-arc story where you kind of went over like the law resistance background with World War II and things like that, it might have bogged down. It might have like kind of lost its rhythm. In like having this seated, or having it all built off of this murder mystery, and then like seeding in things like, the detective finding the law resistance tattoo, and then you immediately realizing that he's kind of a smart guy because he like looks at a tattoo and immediately is like, oh, I know what this is. Like this is a bright guy.
It's actually Lupe, Gutierrez, the officer, who's the one who's the history buff.
Oh, she's smart then. Never mind. Detective also smart, but for different reasons.
Because there's a line where they're looking over financial records, and she says, "This is so boring." He says, "How can you memorize dates, which is literally just numbers, and not find that boring?" She said, "Because those mean something."
Yeah.
So yeah, she's actually the one who's the history buff. She's the one who knows. She was the one who recognized it was a cross of Lorraine.
Yeah. But I also like in the first issue how there's like the quick panel that shows like practicing with knives, and then all of a sudden, I believe it's Rose that throws the knife.
Rose and Violet.
Yeah, exactly. It's Rose and Violet. And there's like, but these little training montages where it's like, I think in stories, like sometimes people over-explain little things like that. You're like, oh, we have to explain this entire thing, when you can just see a little snippet like that and implicitly understand that there's something there. And by not saying everything, like, one of the things I find really interesting in the first issue, and maybe I'm overreading on it, is they didn't seem too sad or surprised by their mom's death. I mean, I think Rose was, but the other, Violet wants to, go and find answers, and Poppy just kind of wants to get back to her life. And all this stuff, by not digging into it immediately, kind of ties us to it, because now we want to know what the story is behind all this. And I think that's really smart. It's like, it it allows you to use that as texture to the world rather than something that you have to tell a full story about, if that makes sense.
No, and I appreciate you picking that up. The other thing is that I mean, these girls, these young women acknowledge the life that their mother lived.
Hmm.
They acknowledge the craziness that their mom went through in terms of, you know, being trained as an assassin as a young, you know, as a young woman herself, traveling the world and all of that. Um, and so, yes, it's really it's tough that their mother is dead, but at the same time, it's almost like, well, you know, mom lived, like, killed a lot of people and lived a pretty hard life. Like, you know, how is it surprising? What's surprising to them, what actually surprises them the most is who got the drop on her.
Right, exactly.
And that's what surprises them, because their mom, you know, passing away, it's almost like somebody who has, you know, cancer or is in hospice or something. When they pass, obviously it's sad, but you've kind of expected it. You know, Jasmine, being trained the way she was almost always started off on borrowed time,
Right.
living this incredibly dangerous life with, I mean, at the time with her family and then coming to the United States, you know, so she almost started off from the get-go on borrowed time. And so that's why it's like, mom's dead, holy shit, but didn't we expect something like this to happen?
Yeah.
At the same time, that doesn't remove the trauma of, you know, a violent death happening.
Right. Yeah. I do. And they all deal with it in their own way. Like I said, like
Yeah.
Violet immediately wants to go and beat some ass. And then you have, I think it's interesting because it's like, you know, for like Poppy, it brings things back for her. It starts like tying her back into her past. And that stuff is really great. But I do want to ask about the creative team. You have a stellar creative team. I think Carola Borelli does a fantastic job with the characters. I'm really interested in how, obviously, James had a extremely huge impact on the story and how it worked, but for like Carola, how did her art maybe unlock the cast for you? Was there something that she did that helped you maybe figure out the characters in a sort of way that you were talking about earlier, where it's like she makes this face and all of a sudden you're like, I don't need to say that because she's already said that?
I had come up with, you know, character, just sort of brief information about the characters. So, the women have a very diverse background. You know, Jasmine's father was Swedish. Her mother was half North African, half French. You know, the girls have, their dad is sort of American mutt, and their mom has got, you know, North African in her. She's got French in her. She's got Swedish. She's got, you know, a whole bunch of other stuff. She was born in Argentina. You know, just very sort of this very rich mix of culture. Um, and so I would say, you know, this character has got, I don't want everybody to be pale lily white. You know, this character has got some olive skin. This character's got dark eyes. This character's got dark hair or light hair or whatever. Um, and I think that everybody sort of has this like sort of cookie cutter, you know, paper doll kind of idea of what people would look like. Well, I wanted them to look different. I wanted them to look like you couldn't really peg what their nationality was. You know, growing up, I was, you know, olive skinned, dark brown eyes, you know, bright blonde hair.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody's like, what is it? And it's like, well, it's part Southern Italian, it's part Neapolitan, and it's part Irish. So, you know, you're getting all kinds of weird things. You know, and I wanted people to say like, oh, okay, yeah, like their mom obviously is not white, but you know, she's not necessarily, you know, what exactly is her mom, you know, what exactly is Jasmine? And the idea is that, you know, Jasmine is a worldly kind of person, you know, so not only is her, you know, genetic makeup of all around the world, but her background, her experience as well. And I just let Carola know like what I was thinking in terms of who these people were. I also let her know sort of their attitude. I let her know what drove them. You know, when I teach, I always say there's four main things that you need to know about every character. Obviously, there's much more, but like sort of the four base things you need to know is their name, where they're from, what they're proud of, and what they're afraid of.
Mm-hmm.
And those are, if you stay true to those things, then your characters are going to be consistent. Even as they evolve over an arc, they're still going to have some sort of like anchor and be consistent. So Carola really just, you know, did some sketches, and a couple of head sketches of each one. And I didn't want everybody to be like super thin and gorgeous. Like Poppy's a little thicker. She's a mom. She's got some kids. Violet's obviously super tall and skinny because Violet does modeling. Whereas Rose is a little more dowdy, kind of thing. These are not like high fashion, despite Kevin Wada's gorgeous cover, these aren't, super high fashion, modelly kind of people, with the exception of Violet. So, and I gave some reference of just, I don't like dictating anything to an artist. I just sort of say, this is the idea. This is the sort of feel, and then see where they take it. And Corolla really, really got sort of absorbed everything, and then, exported out this, really cool look for everybody. And the other thing is that they each look different from each other. They look similar enough to be related, but they each look different from each other. Corolla really just took everything that I sort of, gave her and just, made something herself, it looks great.
Yeah. Some of the poses she gives Violet is just like, I don't know, so loaded with attitude. I love it. But, well, I just have a few more questions. I really, I mentioned earlier about Kickstarters and how Kickstarters aren't necessarily for everyone. They're not like, they can be very overwhelming for people. And it seems like you have a really great plan for the whole thing. I mean, first off, there are a few better ways you can start with any project than having a Kevin Wada cover. I mean, like that right there is a slam dunk. But on top of that, I know you're going to have like a print by Elaine Grace. You're going to have a journal involved with Kevin Wada's cover, things like that. I am interested in like what the process was for like the preparation for this Kickstarter, and also just why you decided that you wanted to Kickstarter and just own this one yourself.
We had originally had a publisher involved, and COVID put the kibosh on that. So there was part of me that said, okay, well, let's sort of wait this COVID thing out. And then there was another part of me that was like, you know what, you spent so many times off and on with this story. You finally got it cracked. Just keep going. James has been very successful with Kickstarters, with 451, with I Am Hexed, running multiple Kickstarters. And I spoke with him a lot, and he was just like, okay, I think we can do this. He's like, I know we can do it. Instead of doing a 5-issue series, we're going to do an OGN.
Right.
So, people are talking, the review copy that I sent out, everybody's saying issue 1. It's technically chapter 1. I mean, if you want to get nitpicky.
Right.
But we are doing an OGN, and we're asking for $20,000, which is, the bare minimum to get this, to get all the art done, to get it printed and everything. And obviously, we're hoping to get more. But, James is very, like me, he has sort of that organizational mindset. And because he has worked with Kickstarter, the only other Kickstarter that I had done was for Strange Tales, which was a story with an anthology with Claire Connolly. So my experience running a Kickstarter, not backing Kickstarters, because I back a lot of them, but my experience running a Kickstarter was, for a relatively smaller amount. It was only for, I think, $5,500. Whereas James has had experience running Kickstarters for larger amounts. And we really just sat down and said, okay, like what, we got very sort of technical and analytical about it. Like, okay, so what sells well? What's the best day of the week to launch your Kickstarter? What can you do? Like, what are the tiers that are really going to be the popular ones? Obviously, probably the most popular tier is getting the book in print. Mm-hmm. So, okay, so you got to make that manageable in terms of, the amount of money for it. What are other things that people want? And because he's experienced this multiple times on multiple different Kickstarters, he could say, look, on this book, on this Kickstarter, this did really well, but it didn't do so well on the last one. Might have to do with the subject matter of the book, but it might also have to do with this. And so, he really was able to give a lot of great experience. Greg Pak has a great book called Kickstarter Secrets. If you ever want to do a Kickstarter, that book will either empower you or scare you off. But definitely go and pick it up. It's a digital book. It's fantastic. Thank you, Greg Pak, because before we did the Strange Tales Kickstarter, that I ran through that. That was great. So, I mean, Greg has got a lot of great tips and experience. Also, talk to other people who've done Kickstarters. Pat Shand who's a fantastic creator for Space Between, does Destiny New York and Gangster Ass Barista. The Kickstarter, Pat does tons of Kickstarters. So I reached out to them and asked, what was your experience with this person or that person or the next thing, or like, and that was for the Strange Tales, but, bringing that information again. So talk to other creators. Kickstarter is not the way to go for a lot of people. It's a lot of project management. If you or you don't have somebody in your life to do that, then it might not be the way to go. I think everybody sort of looks at Kickstarter as like free money. It's not. You work for your money. At Kickstarter, you definitely work for it. And, like I said, James has been so instrumental in this simply because of the past experience that he's had with Kickstarter. And then, Kickstarter itself makes it as easy as possible. Like they give you, once your campaign runs, there are analytics that you could go look at. If you post something on Twitter, how many links from Twitter came back to the Kickstarter page? How many of those links resulted in somebody doing a pledge? So there are a lot of sort of tools, and I don't know if they're considered Google Analytics or Amazon Analytics, whatever, through Kickstarter that you can really look at and you can really exploit and really figure out, oh, this time of day on this day is when I'm going to get the most engagement and things like that. And I know Twitter does that too sometimes, where you can sort of look up analytics, how many times people have, clicked on did they click the link? Did they expand the tweet? All this other stuff, did they go to your bio page? And I think that's important. Some people don't want to get into that technical stuff. And believe me, there are times that I don't want to either, but I think it's also important to look at because that is helpful information. And I think, more information is always better because then you can still make a decision, but you're making a more informed decision.
Yeah. I mean, I just got to say, like, I think this is one time where your type A personality definitely really, really benefits you because, I mean, what you're talking about should not be considered. I mean, this should be the fundamentals, like having a data-driven approach, but also being very pragmatic about the whole thing. And I'll give you credit. This is a huge feather in your cap. I've talked to a lot of people before they're about to start a Kickstarter, and most of them seem at least like 11% petrified. You seem 0% petrified.
Oh, no. I'm about 78% petrified. I am just really good at faking it.
Okay, you hide it very well.
Look, it's funny. My mom was a surgical nurse. My dad was a medic in the Army. And I've always learned that in stressful situations, you have to remain calm. Mm-hmm. If you don't remain calm, your blood pressure increases. When your blood pressure increases, it can actually affect your decision making. Mm-hmm. So like I had a really bad car accident several years ago. And I'm going to get gross. There's literally a piece of my face hanging off. And I'm telling the guy who hit me to please calm down. And he's screaming at me, your face is coming off. And I'm like, no, sir, it will be fine. You need to come down. And it's almost like this sort of robotic kind of thing. And it makes people incredibly unsettled. But it's just me tempering everything to say, okay, you're going to have to make a very important decision, either for your life, for your money, which, let's be honest, in this capitalistic society is pretty close to your life these days, kind of thing. You're going to have to stay calm, and you're going to have to make the decision with a clear head. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have the opportunity to like sleep on it, and you got to make it pretty quick, you got to stay calm. And that's not everything. Oh, believe me, I have my moments of like, what the hell's going on? And that's where surrounding yourself with good people who can be objective is important, because they can say, hey, look, you've gone over the edge. Let's gently pull the bungee cord back.
Yeah.
Or you have every right in the world to be as pissed off as you are, but you're scaring me. So let's just like go have a milkshake and calm down.
Yeah. That's a very good approach. But, well, I want to close with an extremely random question that I came across something.
Random's good. That's every interview with me is totally random. Who knew you would learn about my mom being a surgical nurse? I mean, come on.
Well, so you did an interview with Screen Invasion in which they asked you one of the very common questions people ask, which is what superpower would you have? And I have to say your answer was truly inspiring. I don't know if you remember this. This is a while ago, but you said
invisibility so I could prank my husband.
No, it's telekinesis because I'm lazy.
Oh yeah, it's one of those two. It's one of those two things. It's either telekinesis because I'm lazy and I don't want to like have to get up from my seat. My husband. Okay, so for Valentine's Day, my husband got me this thing that's supposed to track my steps, and everybody's like, "Oh, that's like that Peloton ad where the husband gets the wife the Peloton." No, I actually asked for this.
Yeah.
Okay, so I could see how freaking lazy I am. All right, and I know I'm lazy. I just look. I'm very much a reincarnated cat. I like nice, warm, sunny patches. Every time I'm sitting, this is my knee. I'm sitting curled up at all times. I'm a cat. I've always been like a cat. I want to be home in the corner of the couch with a blanket over me, all nice and happy, and that's it. Or rather, happy that I'm miserable. Whatever. But yeah, I mean, my husband and I have this joke. Whenever something's out of reach, we'll like reach for it and say, "I'm using the force." And that basically is the cue for the other person to pick it up and hand it to us.
Yeah.
So I'm always like, "I'm using the force," because I'm too lazy to lean forward and get the remote like a lazy person.
Yeah.
But it's either invisibility to prank my husband or telekinesis because I'm lazy. Yes, those are the two things that I want. And if I was invisible and telekinetic, holy crap.
Yeah.
But if you're telepathic, then you can make people think that you're invisible, i.e., Jean Grey having that telepathic and telekinetic thing going on. So,
It's a great combination. No, my wife and I would actually do the Harry Potter equivalent, which was Accio. We would be like Accio sandwich. All those different things. I will say, though, part of the reason why I really appreciate it is because so many people have these like grand aspirations with that power question. And like mine is similar to yours in the sense that I want to have the powers of Wally West as the Flash, because canonically, when he runs really fast, he burns a shit ton of calories, and I just want to eat more. And so like when I saw that, I was like, this is a kindred spirit. I really appreciate this. It's like, mine's not really lazy, but it's more about like sloth. So I think that we're covering like 2 of the 7 deadly sins, and I support that.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm listening to my cat snore and I'm just so jealous.
Oh.
He's curled up in a nice happy ball, fat, happy, and stupid. Like if I could just be fat, happy, and stupid and just live in like a perpetual sunspot on the floor, that would be like the greatest thing ever. I want to be a cat.
That sounds amazing.
I really do. I want to be a cat, but I would be a cat that would write, because then like I'd be like sleeping and be like, "Oh, I have this idea. Oh wait, let me get up." That's the thing is like I'm actually anti-lazy with all the things that I do, but I want to be lazy.
Yeah, you're aspirationally lazy.
I don't want to feel guilty about being lazy because I got deadlines and all the other stuff that I'm supposed to do. So yeah.
I have 2 cats, one of whom has been trying to burrow into my office this entire time because I close the door during podcasts. And I have to tell you this because you're a cat person and you would appreciate this. Everyone else is going to think I'm a psychopath. But I have told my wife on multiple occasions that I want to be the Jane Goodall of cats when I'm a senior citizen. I want to I want to have have a massive mansion that I don't use for myself, but I use as like an orphanage for wayward cats or something like that. I love cats. Cats are amazing. It's a great life.
There is an older BuzzFeed YouTube video about drunk guys talking about their cats.
Oh my God.
And this one guy has 6 kittens, and he's like, you just wake up in the morning with freaking 6 kittens on your face, and it's amazing.
Oh my God.
I'm like, wow, that dude is like me.
Yeah. I never expected to even want a pet, and then I got cats, and now I'm just like calling myself the Jane Goodall of cats on a podcast. So there you go. But anyways, we could go on about cats for forever. Erica, that is all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about your career, your approach to comics, The Deadliest Bouquet, and most importantly, cats. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me, David. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with writer Erica Schultz. You can find her on Twitter at Erica Schultz 42 and in the currently being Kickstarted The Deadliest Bouquet. Love Off Panel and want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts today and give the show a rating and review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing it on Patreon. Find the show at patreon.com/offpanel, and when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my subscription comic site, Sketched, at sketch.com for long-form articles, interviews, and the rest of the site's content and its members-only forum. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by liking it on Facebook at /Sketched, that's SKTCHD, follow on Twitter and Instagram at @SketchComic, or following me at @SliceFriedGold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Scott Blouin, Dr. Luke, Michael Tunk, Canadian by Proxy, Johnny Kanan, Zach Thompson, Bradley Roeder, Carl Troy, Megan Marsden, Brandon DePillis, Patrick Brower, Declan Shalvey, Dan Garino, Josh Williamson, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein Q, SB, Antonio Offen, Nick Bennett, Daniel Whitfield, Scotty Young, Susanna Polo, Jeff Weira, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, AbductedTheComic.com, Andrew Carita, Matt Mahoney, Charlie Chu, Stephen Hole, Pensacola Pop Comics, Kim Eslam, Philip Myra, Christian Shelton, Kenny Porter, Chris Pacello, Torin Grunbeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Carl Mizell, Danny Ollie, Paul Salates, Akil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Leona Kangas, Wesley Gift, Sean Kirkham, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwatt, Vita Ayala, Tara Ferguson, Dave Slusher, WMQ Comics, Akil Kokachi, Sean Pinello, Kent Heidelman, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, David Kelly, Rob Wilson IV, Nick Polito, Brendan Fletcher, Gary Maloney, Jonathan Nilsson, Matthew Groom, Jason Massey, Adam Bogert, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Braldy, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Ian Maxwell, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Schipper, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Adam Highfield, Fiona Staples, Chris O'Halloran, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonakos, Norbert, Niccolo, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.